Oh,
Okay, hello
exciting.
and welcome to Minor Compositions. Tonight we're joined by Sophie Malore and Simon Poulter. So thanks to you two for coming along.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, thanks. We're very excited about this.
Yes, so the idea is a few weeks ago, was it a few weeks ago now? Yeah, I went to a screening of the film you are working on making and never finishing. We are making a film about Mark Fisher. It was screened at the University of Essex, and I thought it'd be nice to have a little bit of a chat and sort of, yeah. So maybe as a starting point, we could sort of just like so. How did you come to start making this film which will never end the making?
We started making a film about Mark Fisher when Sophie and I were doing another project in Rochford in Essex. So we have something. Essex is a kind of
Yeah,
meta county for us,
it
isn't
was
it?
a lovely sunny day, and we were in Cherry Orchard, Jubilee Park. We were making a film about the park there and about green spaces in general. And we were talking to Tim Burrows, who's a journalist and author that lives in Southend, and just generally having a chat sitting on the bench in the sun.
And so Tim was talking a bit about Mark Fisher, and Tim actually interviewed Mark Fisher. And we said, well, it's kind of interesting that nobody's really gone a bit deeper in on a film about Mark Fisher. And then we were kind of cross checking and we agreed that K Punk is an amazing book. Not only is it one of the thickest books you can have on your bookshelf, but it's kind of like an interesting read. And then I said to Tim, let's make a film about Mark Fisher. And Tim said, well, yeah, sure. And I think he thought it was one of those things that
Yeah,
was
you
part
just
of,
say, yeah.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, we at that point decided that we would make a film about Mark Fisher.
It's interesting because before we started we talked a little bit about McLuhan and one quote I remember from McLuhan I really like is when McLuhan talks about how fishes don't know the water they're in. Um, and in a way, thinking about where we are today, and particularly within radical publishing media circles, I feel like Mark is kind of like the water in a way. His ideas are quite diffuse in a way, which is quite nice, but also kind of like hard to recognize them because they're everywhere.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think so. I think also one of the things about Mark Fisher, he certainly weaved in other currents of water into his writing. So he's very much informed by other writers like Jameson and Zizek and Biffo Bernardi.
yeah. So yeah, he does. I mean, I think the main thing about Mark Fisher is that when we started this, we had no idea that we were diving into a deep river. Actually, what you continuing your metaphor, and actually, when you're in the Mark Fisher River, it's a really interesting space to be in. But as we will find out when we go through some more questions, there are some issues that arose that we had no idea would happen.
Mm. I think also he feels a bit like the water around us because he is so contemporary. You know, we could have all gone down to the pub with him. He's so kind of like here, especially, because he's used to live in England, obviously is English. So it's really accessible. He's like, he could have been one of your friends. And obviously we talked to a lot of Mark's friends as well as part of the film, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit.
I suppose you could say you thought you were jumping into a river, but discovered that it was actually uh, a quite deeply dredged port near Felixstowe instead.
Well, yeah, we did shoot the opening sections of the film actually right there. And that was quite, I don't know, I would say quite a moving experience for us to do that. We spent a few days in Felixstowe and it's really interesting that Mark lived there because capitalism is coming in on huge ships and there's huge cranes dealing with all of this stuff. And, capitalist realism is really in your face when you're in Felixstowe.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah.
But also, you could do a whole sort of like history of the way that, for instance, the ports in East London are shutting down at the point where Felixstowe is actually being built up as a giant port, which is in the 60s.
Yeah. And I believe that's to do with containerization, isn't it? And
Yeah.
how efficiency was created in the 60s through containerization. And I don't know if Mark Fisher wrote about containerization, but he certainly talked about efficiency and those kind of ideals of how capitalism has its own kind of like processes and methodologies. And when you were in Felixstowe, you're within a mile of a big port, and then you're also in one of the most um, interesting landscapes, which, as we now know, is kind of a psychogeographic mecca point for a lot of people. People go to Felixstowe and that beach to follow the tracks of Mark Fisher and Justin Barton, and obviously there's a whole psychogeographic thing around that location with other people's work as well. So
Mhm.
yeah,
One of the things the film reminded me of is, and I'm blanking on the name of the director, but I remember seeing two films about psychogeography in London about 15 years ago. Uh, Garrison? No. Do you
Patrick
remember
Keeler.
Yes, yes. Sorry, I was going to say Garrison Keller, but I knew that was like what we got on a totally different thing. But yeah. But that sounds sort of like a drifting, making sense, trying to make sense of things, being haunted by certain things. I mean, was that an influence or was that accidental?
I think. What do you mean in our film, the one we've
Yeah.
made?
It was a bit of both, really, I think. I mean, obviously, we were drawn to Felixstowe because Mark used to live there. And then it does have this psychogeographic kind of history. So I think with making this film, a lot of things were intentional and a lot of things weren't. Like the whole filming process and editing process, it grew, it developed over time. It wasn't like, we had remnants of scripts, but they often changed, or things developed from who we met,
Mm.
who worked on the film with us. So it was very much like an organic process.
Mm.
Yeah, no,
But I'm also thinking in that, see, now trying to remember actually having watched the film, you have a sort of setup where there is a sort of like, let's say, story in the background. We have a narrator and there's something happening. But I've kind of blanked on actually what it was, other than there's a character that's being drawn on. Yeah, that was also the connection I was making, where I suppose in those films you have who's the narrator, the sort of
It's Justin Hopper is the narrator, and his character. So one of the starting points for the film was M.R. James' ghost story.
yeah, yeah.
What was the name of it again?
it's Whistle, My Lad, and I'll
That's it.
come to you. Yeah.
Yeah, so we particularly watched
Mm.
Jonathan Miller's production film of that book, which starred Michael Hordern. So we watched that, and as part of the kind of the whole hauntology exploration of the film, is so we invited Justin Hopper to be Professor Parkins, who's from the M.R. James story, and we recreated some of the scenes from Jonathan Miller's film. So you see a scene at the beginning of our film where Justin Hopper as Professor Parkins leans down and he finds this whistle, and it says on it, "Who is this? Who is coming?" And he blows it like the Michael Hordern character did in Jonathan Miller's film. And then, there's some sort of haunting going on. We don't see anything. We see him running down the beach. So we're recreating set clips from the film. He jumps onto the sand dunes. So we're kind of building him up as this kind of character. And in the beginning, we were just going to do that beginning scene in Felixstowe with Justin being Professor Parkins. And then Justin is so amazing. He was so brilliant. And he was doing, he started off doing some voiceover that we then started thinking, well, why not have this character, kind of at the edges of the film coming in and out. So he acts as narrator, and also as a sort of fictional character just floating in this now or before or the future. We're not quite sure. And also the great thing about Justin, because he's American, so he has an American accent. So it was very clear that he wasn't Mark Fisher, and he wasn't really Professor Parkins, because Professor Parkins as a character is English. He's this professor at Cambridge. So again, there was other things folded into this like fictional character then that was then wandering through our film that also featured, people being them.
And another thing which is important when you see the film is that Professor Parkins is a fictional character, and in our film, he becomes real. So his hauntology is kind of a reversed hauntology, and he has to then face the permacrisis of 2025. And so he kind of leaps from 1909 through the decades, past Jonathan Miller, into the now. And then we get a sense that he, as a fictional character, is pleased to go back to the fiction because the permacrisis is such a full-on thing. And that's an important thing about the film. The film structure is not just a biographical piece of work about Mark Fisher. We decided to actually carry on working through the timeline beyond 2017 up to 2025. And the reason for that was that we didn't want to create a kind of straight biog documentary film about Mark Fisher, because we didn't have a budget to do that. The whole film was made on no dollar. And so, as Sophie said, the way the film actually progressed was much more intuitive and responsive to the resources that we had available.
And also, it was very much based on the Instagram account that we started off. So that was, right at the beginning when we were just thinking about the film. Simon set up an Instagram account called We Are Making a Film About Mark Fisher. So that was immediately the name of the film, which when Simon first called the film that, I was a bit like, oh, that's very kind of, there's no room around that. It's just so like, we are making a film about Mark Fisher. But then you kind of start taking on that title. And then in a way, I guess the title more and more informed how we were making the film, and the fact that it was that we posted about its how we were making it and the process on Instagram. And people, are so into Mark Fisher, we discovered partly through that Instagram. It garnered a lot of followers, got much more followers than either Simon or I's personal Instagram accounts. And, people are really interested in Mark Fisher and the film. And as we went on making the film, we put out various call outs to people. So one of the most successful things I think about the film was embracing new music. Most of it came to us through the Instagram account from people I don't think we've still met yet. Some of them, have we? Mm-hmm. So, and we got all this amazing music. Like some of it was music that already existed, but also some people did actually make music especially for the film, and we gave them kind of like prompts, some themes. I don't know if we want to talk about Michael Valentine West's and
so Michael Valentine West is a kind of glitch artist from Birmingham, and he made a really amazing piece of music based on Mamas and Papas California Dreaming. That is in the Hauntology section, because for me, California Dreaming is sort of like the ultimate hauntological track, really. It takes me into a kind of like slightly gooey sort of like, I love that track, but it makes me feel weird. So he remade that track. And then Esther Glavane, who is a film student from Belgium, she just DM'd and said, I'd like to make something for the film. And so we said yes, and she came up with the opening signature music for it, which is very evocative of all the ships coming in with the containers. Um, but one of your other questions was about that process, and actually, rather interestingly, the whole process was not really a problem. So we worked commission quite frequently, and we might work with other people with funded projects. And I would say we generally encounter more problems. This project was very much using a manifesting technique, which is clearly of a different generation to that which we come from. But we
But it
decided,
worked, didn't it?
yeah, we decided to manifest, and stuff happened. And I think we would now make more projects like this with a lot more celebration of the uncertain. And we've always been big fans of John Cage and Indeterminacy. And this film has got a lot of that in it, really. So, yeah.
But I think also with the process, it was very important to be very clear and open. It's like we're crazy open, really. Like, you know, we're sharing bits from the film before we'd finished making it, all the kind of stuff that you're not really supposed to do. And I found that a little bit difficult. But I took that on, and actually that was kind of the key to producing this decapitalized film, where we had 70 artists who all contributed to the film in different ways, and no one got paid, and we didn't get paid either. We did it on zero budget. Well, we put some of our own money in because some things do cost money, like trains. But it was also, I think, just because we were so open about the process, and also I think there's something about, you know, I've never met Mark Fisher, but there's something about him and the way he wrote was very open as well. And again, because he feels like quite a close peer, because of his age, you know, people responded to that openness that we put out through the Instagram, and being, you know, very clear about how we were making the film. Both those things were really important. And then, you know, it's like, if you make yourself really open and vulnerable, it's quite a vulnerable place to be in as an artist, sharing your work before it's finished. But I think people appreciated that. And I think that openness and vulnerability meant people could then, you know, kind of come back with stuff that, you know, they were interested in, how they wanted to contribute to the film.
But I think it really works for the film because you're not doing the straight authoritative biopic. You're
Yeah.
almost more about, if the film becomes about the process of making the film, it becomes about what it means to people who are also making the film. It becomes about that like an effective investment, you know, or the wanting to stay with the ghost that's haunting is almost like what actually makes it work.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that happened along the way was that we started to think about the process. And as Sophie said, the whole thing is on the Instagram account. So although we're not academic, the first part of it is a bit like what I think you would call a literature review. So we read everything. We read all the stuff that Mark Fisher read, like Baradi. And then we started to think about who were the people who were important to connect to. Probably one of the most important in the film is Jodie Dean. So she conducted an interview, which I think very much uh, tells the story about Mark Fisher's work, but also about where we are now. So she acts as a bridging voice. We contacted Andy Beckett, who's a journalist for The Guardian, and he agreed to talk about Mark Fisher's legacy. So there are two very strong voices in there who are people who both knew Mark. But there were people we contacted who weren't comfortable about being interviewed, and we really respected that because there's still a strong sense of loss about Mark Fisher, and people feel quite, obviously very profoundly around, his circumstances, and also, as Sophie points out, Mark Fisher wrote in a very direct and honest way, which I think is why he does reach out to people so brilliantly. Um, but one of the things about the film's reception, and it would be great, with your podcast, is that the film lands back in the room. So it doesn't ever end, this film. And so every time we show it, we have a conversation. All the conversations are different, but something which is really uplifting is that we have met quite a few younger people in their 20s who are students or younger academics who are really affected by the film, and they feel a sense of engagement and purpose from thinking about Mark Fisher's work. And that for us is kind of like probably the best outcome that we could imagine, is that a new generation of people are reading his stuff, taking away different aspects of that and working on it, and they're visual artists and writers, and so it's not catalyzed, as you said, in a kind of like epic way. That's really important.
Well, also, it was a purposeful mode of distribution. So we purposely have been showing the film around art colleges, or what might have been called art colleges, because that partly because there is such a threat to art education in this country. Lots of universities are shutting down their art courses, and a lot of art colleges have turned into universities. So this kind of idea of an art school where anybody could go to, they might not come out as an artist, they might come out and they're in a band, or they go off and make films, or they're a designer, or just this kind of, we're starting to lose these places where you can go and meet lots of different sorts of people and have creative discussions and explore cultural theory. And I think that's going to be a massive impact on this country, in the next generation's time, where that kind of thinking, which doesn't necessarily have to be used to make cultural artifacts, but just that creative way of thinking, is going to be massively decreased by losing art schools. So it was a definite decision to distribute the film in the beginning at art schools around the country, and I think that's really important, like, especially someone like Mark Fisher, who is so close to us in time. For people to discover him or just have the opportunity to talk about his theories is really important.
I mean, I think I said before, and I'll just say it again, the moment where I was talking to Mark most was around 2008, 2009, right around when Repeater was starting, because that's also when I was starting on the Minor Compositions imprint. And it was quite a interesting moment where there seemed to be a lot of sort of, let's say, philosophy was exiting sort of traditional academic publishing houses and finding new places to sort of inhabit and circulate. And I thought that was quite interesting moment of trying to sort of say, we want to have a space for thinking together, but it doesn't have to be, in the usual place. It can be somewhere else. It could be, it can be at a club night. It can be at a cafe. It can be in a weird place. It can involve strange things.
Yeah, definitely. That's really well said. Because Mark Fisher's writing does resonate with working class people, and he writes a lot about that in its relationship to art school and education in general. But the other thing which is kind of interesting is that when you talk to people who met Mark, he would often give them his email, and they might be writing something, and he he would always follow up with people, and
Mm,
he never left people, in the lurch. So there's a tremendous kindness and generosity, and that is something we wanted to talk about in the making of the film. So the process does very much echo the same kindness of Mark's approach. The other thing is that a number of people said that he was pretty happy editing other people's work and supporting other people's work. He was as interested in that as he was in writing his own stuff. And it's quite interesting to think about somebody like that who, capitalist realism is still read by thousands of people. It's a kind of enduring piece of text, um, and I don't think, in a way, he could have made himself a lot more inaccessible and just kind of cracked on with his career. But I think everybody you talk to about Mark Fisher says the same thing. He would give you the time of day, he would follow up, and he would reach out to people, and that kind of generosity is great, and we want to echo that in what we're doing.
mm. I mean, this isn't one of the things the film explores, but it's something I've been thinking about recently. Is sometimes it strikes me that the ways after someone leaves this world, the ways in which, let's say, bourgeois property law allocates them and what they own to basically immediate family, oftentimes seems a bit weird compared to like how the people they've affected like almost feel like they're a part of that inheritance, that makes sense. But that sort of being affected by and being a part of a community that has been influenced by someone's ideas has little recognition within property law. I don't know what to make of it other than it feels a bit strange at times.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that is interesting. The I think a key thing is like, one of your questions was about the ethics of what we've done, and I think we are interested to explore that. So the ethics of this film are to treat the whole process sensitively and in a
Mm,
respectful way, but also there's an understanding that, after somebody has died, they can, um, kind of take up their life can take on other meanings. And this is particularly the case with people who become famous either posthumously or during their lifetimes. And a good example, which was came my way, was Roger Deakin, who is the guy who wrote Waterlog, um, who became posthumously famous after his death. And Deakin's Waterlog is kind of now the text for Wild Swimming. Roger Deakin was my English teacher at this grammar school, and he was a very quirky bloke, actually. And as a number of people have said, he was definitely not a saint. But actually, what happens to people when their legacy carries on beyond their life is that they can be elevated and perhaps distorted in some ways. And that has kind of happened to a
mm,
certain extent with Roger Deakin. Also with Mark Fisher, people just he has become a cult figure in some respects, and his writing, sort of talks to that, really, in that a lot of his ideas are still resonant. Um, but I think one of the things that Sophie and I felt about this, which we've spoken about already a little bit, is to always be grounded in thinking about the actual person that lived and the people that knew them. So the film, perhaps if we'd had more resource, we would have spent more time talking to more people. We did speak to lots of people, either on or off record, but there is a kind of thing where, this might make you laugh, we set the date for the release of the film to September the 26th, um, without having any idea if we could actually achieve that.
We did achieve that.
So you could, where I'm heading is we could have spent like another 2 or 3 years on this easily.
Mm.
It is so interesting, and also the way of working.
But really, it's
Yeah,
also bound by our personal economics. You know, we are precarious workers, so we could only spend so long working on something that wasn't earning us any money, and that's just a reality. So in a way, our personal circumstances are weaved into the film, but also um, we kind of started making this film back in 2011, but we didn't actually know we were doing it at that point. So in the section that we've kind of called the capitalist realism section, there's lots of footage from various protests that took place in 2011. So there's a TUC rally. There's also, well, Kate and William's wedding. That's not really a protest, or maybe it is. I don't know. So we filmed lots of different protests, and we just did it at the time because we were living in London, and you know, lots of stuff happens in London. So we got out there and filmed it. So you can see little snatches of our younger selves in the film as we're both filming the protests, and we just kind of kept it in our archive until we started talking about making a film about Mark Fisher. And then it was like, wow, this is like gold. We've got all this amazing footage. And again, partly because there's no money to make the film. So all the footage had to be stuff that we could use that was kind of like ours. We couldn't afford to buy stock footage, but we had all this amazing footage that you know fitted in definitely around what Mark was thinking about and writing about in 2011, 2012. So that was amazing really to have all that.
yeah,
It's like one of the things I asked at that screening was about as you mentioned a minute ago, the sort of the kind of weird cult around Mark, and I realized the question I asked that it was actually a little bit unfair, in that yes, you could engage with that, but it would just be a different film. Um,
yeah. There, I mean, the thing to say, Stephen, is that if you get, as I'm sure you know, if you go on YouTube, there's like so much Mark Fisher content, and there's like videos, blog posts. There's kind of like all kinds of things, and it you know it'll just keep going and going. But the um, the one thing that happened, which was kind of interesting, is that I met Tarek Goddard, who some people will know worked really closely with Mark Fisher, and Tarek was the publisher basically of Repeater and Zero, and an amazing guy actually. And I think it would be fair to say that at the start of the process, it wasn't really clear as to where we were heading, but it felt quite important to talk with him about what we were doing. Um, and then gradually, as that relationship evolved, he actually was really helpful in particularly giving us insights into the historic nature of Mark's writing, and became a consultant to the film. And we didn't ever set out for that to be the case. But he did say, uh, you know, if you get a film out about Mark Fisher, there's going to be a lot of interest. And actually, that was completely true. There has been way more interest than we could have imagined.
yeah, Tariq is a lovely guy and an excellent writer, and an excellent organizer of many different projects.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you know there are other people that, I mean, I suppose we're not just name checking. What we're saying is that we some people use this term Fisherati to describe people who are kind of within the Mark Fisher network. And there are some amazing people who obviously Mark worked with very closely. Um, um, but coming back to your question about, or the discussion about working with somebody with a legacy, I think that is quite an interesting thing that we probably underestimated that when you work with a legacy, you're working with not just uh, the ideas and writing of somebody like Mark, who's no longer with us. You're writing with the legacy and ideas of people who knew Mark and are still alive. So there's sort of complexities to that need to be navigated.
Yeah, I think especially, his close friends, there there can often be quite it's kind of be quite a weight to, because you're suddenly like the guardian of somebody's work and memory. So quite a few of his friends that we spoke to who aren't necessarily in the film, it's still very raw. His death is still very raw. And also they feel this sense of responsibility to kind of look after his work and his public kind of consumption. And that's a lot for people to look after, isn't it? So there's a lot of like personal responsibility of looking after his work.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand that. I mean, to give you a sort of similar example, like I was friends with David Graeber for 20 years, and I went in October to a conference on his work in Italy, and one of the things he kept saying again is like you're missing the jokes, you're missing like him being like total goofball, you're missing all like the random
Yeah,
things that like make someone that like don't necessarily always appear in the text, but are very important.
right.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, the other person who is in the film is Simon Reynolds, who actually was kind of a bit older than Mark Fisher, and Simon Reynolds actually was really helpful actually in shaping some of the thinking about the music that um, I mean, that's a really important thing to say about Mark Fisher's work is that in order to gain legibility, if you were doing like, let's say, a literature review, you'd have to do like the equivalent music review. So that's what we did is we listened to The Caretaker and Burial, and we listened to Japan, and we listened to quite a lot of post-punk music,
Mm.
and I'm obviously of an age where that's not a problem for me
You
because
were a
I
punk.
that's the music that I grew up with too. So, but I really like this idea that I mean, obviously, there's a whole thing around hauntological music, we've met Travis Elborough, who helped us with the film, who is very recondite about popular culture references. But the key thing about the music is the music almost holds things in a different way to the writing.
Mm.
And you're saying about things being effective, and Fisher liked that word effective and effective behavior. I think to really get an understanding of quite a lot of the writing, you can almost like listen to the music at the same time, and then you get the kind of uh, the problem that Mark Fisher had with the kind of sense of the end of the road in music, that it's all been done, and this kind of idea of the impasse, which you also get at a first read with capitalist realism. And I think that's something we probably uh, try to deal with in the film by saying that the film works beyond a certain period and it lands in the room. Because otherwise, if you see capitalist realism and music as being kind of, a sense of an impasse, as Jodie Dean calls it, then it sort of leaves people generationally stranded. It's like me saying, I saw the Stranglers at St Andrew's Hall in Norwich in 1979 and wearing that as a badge of honor. And then, um, you know, a younger person not really being able to access that kind of same culture. And you might say, well, there's a bit of kind of like old gitdom in there, but there's something problematic in this idea of the impasse of capitalist realism. And that's sort of where we get to acid communism, which, of course, I'm sure you have a lot to say about.
Well, the way I like to think about it, okay, sometimes people ask me like, they find it hard to read works let's say like Stefano Hardy and Fred Moten. And first thing they say to them is, listen, like their collaboration begins in poetry. What you got to do is find the poetic meter in the writing. Like rather than trying to read like every single word and try to analyze it like in a very literal like analytical sense, find the rhythm and find where the rhythm puts the emphasis and then read it that way. And I think in a certain way, the way Mark writes at times is not always just writing about music, but it's almost like writing with the music, is writing with the vibe, the affect. Um, and that those things which are usually the background become very much collaborators.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Yeah, but I think like Sophie said, in our film about Mark Fisher, all of the music is new music. Partly that is to do with we couldn't afford to license tracks from Warp Records, for example, although we would have liked to have used some of that music because it's amazing. But we have worked with new artists, and we feel like within our film we can kind of get new work listened to. So it's not an end of the road kind of approach. We're actually using creative tools and digital media and the things that are readily available to us to craft a film. Um, I mean, another consideration, for example, is that the film isn't graded. So if you make a movie, generally you spend,
Mm.
I don't know, a few months just grading the material. And as we had stuff which was shot on flip phones from 2011.
But that was part of it really, is trying to stay true to the medium that it was shot on. So like saying Simon was saying the flip camera, a lot of it was shot on iPhones, and then some of it was shot on, really good cameras, but we didn't try and hide that fact in the film. So there's a lot of different
I'm
types of
guessing the
footage.
visual setup of certain sequences appearing as if they're on an iPad. I was assuming that was a way to sort of reduce the screen size to make the blurriness less obvious.
Oh my God, you found us out.
Yeah,
It
I'm,
works. It works well.
yeah.
That was part of the reason, yeah. But those scenes that you're talking about, we actually recreated Mark Fisher's bookshelves. So behind the computer screen that you see in the film is Mark Fisher's bookshelf, and it does contain books that he would have had on his bookshelf, but also is populated with titles that are more recent. So that also acts as a little reference point should people want to explore more reading around Mark Fisher. But yeah, necessity is the mother of invention. So, because he had no money, and because we had a lot of footage from different cameras and different decades, it was definitely interesting to edit to get the full effect from the lots of different footage.
Yeah.
And I think also, it's hard making something when you're not getting paid. I don't want to like say that's really great, but one great outcome was all the new music. So maybe if we'd had money, we would have bought tracks in, but we didn't. So we then invited people to create music. So yeah, I think that is a plus side to
And
that
also
constraint.
around the ethics of that, one of the things that we are doing with the film is a profit share. So there probably won't be much of a profit, but because the film has garnered quite a lot of interest, we are going to make it available as a Vimeo download in December.
Well, pay for view.
Pay for view.
Yeah,
And
Just in time for Christmas.
yeah, so yeah, the
exactly.
Christmas movie, yeah.
The height of consumerism. We've got the film coming out about
But
capitalist realism.
yeah, the point I'm sort of being struggling to make is that basically what we're trying to do is retain the collective identity of the group of people that made it.
Yeah. So any profit, which will be small, is going to be divided equally up between everybody who contributed to the film. So to kind of carry on that kind of political idea of collective working.
And
Very
if
nice.
we, yeah, if we get the opportunity, we hope to show the film in Birmingham, but there is a kind of like an idea of potentially working with somebody like Michael Valentine West with some live uh, glitch music to the film. So the film could be deconstructed and remade as a live piece.
Mm.
In that sense, that's yeah.
I also like the some conversations with Adam from Acid Horizon, who in some was I think as a project trying to extend or many of the ideas that for Mark as well.
Yeah, no, no. So yeah, Adam C. Jones is in the film, and he, as everybody points out, is remarkably articulate around Mark's work, but also brings a sort of freshness of insight into it about things like acid communism, and um, acid communism has definitely got some kind of holds in a positive way within independent culture in the UK and US and Canada. People are looking at acid communism as a kind of formative thing to begin to do other things with. So I think that's great.
Yeah, and also in the film, one of the interviewees, Mickey Aurora, is a Canadian artist who's been really inspired by acid communism. And she came to us through the Instagram account as well. So we've never actually met her in person, but she did a brilliant interview over Zoom, which ended up on the faux computer screen in the film. So she's a younger artist, and she's been inspired by Mark Fisher's writing, probably in quite a different way than other people in different countries have been inspired. So it was really interesting to hear her angle on acid communism.
Mm.
Yeah, I think one of the greatest ways to judge someone's work is not just people take it up almost like the many different ways people can take it up. And the fact that people do different things with ideas is actually much more interesting than if they just wrote, 17 more critical theory books that were the same,
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I have a question for you, actually, Stephen. If Fisher imagined the return of lost futures, what futures for collective filmmaking would you see emerging from what we do?
Um, I'm not sure, but one thing I would say is I think he would like the way that you took the project, where you're attempting to sort of not, because the infrastructure of Instagram of social media is still obviously, you know, owned by some of the worst people in the world, right? But you're trying to find a way to sort of make a space and make do with that kind of space, and how do you exist in and through it. Um, I think he might be interested in seeing not necessarily the return of, but like, do you know things like Nebula, sort of like more like worker owned and cooperatively organized streaming services and for collective
Mm.
making. I think things like that could be interesting. Maybe we could see almost the return of like 1930s style worker photography, but in like different ways. And almost a sort of de-emphasizing the end product and more about what is created through the space of screening or discussion, more so than like just the thing itself.
Mm.
I think that, yeah, it's kind of like when you go to an art exhibition, it's sometimes it can be more about like the social interactions that happen in and around and through the art than it is about the actual art itself.
Mm.
So
Yeah,
film as a sort of medium to almost recovering the kind of sociality we've lost through years of collapse in austerity and COVID and everything else, right?
yeah,
But then look at the sociality that we created through the Instagram.
Yeah, yeah.
We create a whole group of people around the film and the making of the film. Instagram, in a way, is using like popular tools, and not, I wouldn't say we really subverted it, but just using it in a different way. So we weren't sharing pictures of our, restaurant style meals. We were sharing our thoughts and conversations. And I think, it was a shame when Twitter got, Elon Musk, because that was actually quite a good space for discussions. And Instagram is a harder space to have discussions. I think we almost managed it with Mark Fisher
Yeah.
Instagram, and actually, had interesting discussions on it. So I think you can take social media owned by, some of the worst people in the world and change its use. And I think also, it has historically been used politically around protest very effectively. Obviously, it's shut down in particular countries, but it can also be used in different ways. And I think if you're someone like Mark Fisher, who was talking about popular culture alongside, higher brow cultural theory, using something that is now used to disseminate popular culture to talk about Mark Fisher, I think is kind of cool.
I had
Definitely.
another. Sorry, Stephen, you go on.
Well, that's about making space and inhabiting those spaces, because if you put it on like you know the Fediverse of some server that like only five people look at, you
Mm,
wouldn't get the same effect. So
no,
there's a certain ambivalence about that, which is going to be quite productive and useful. Yeah.
yeah.
I had another question for you. Um, we are making a film about Mark Fisher. Did the metafictional angle that the artists use to grapple with limits of biography, theory, and representation work for you?
Um, I, I I have to admit, I don't think I was completely grasping it a complete like at the first time you're watching it, but like and yeah, and part of that for me is okay, this is my problem, but I brought along my 13-year-old son, and when I'm bringing him to things, I'm also thinking about, is he okay? Is he bored? And I sort of lose a bit of attention.
Hmm.
Um, I think it's one of those things where I think it'll make more sense after repeated viewings.
Yeah,
Um, I got that there was something happening. I didn't totally understand it, but I thought it was interesting.
yeah, good.
I think we're okay with people not totally understanding everything that's happening, because that often happens to me when I'm watching films. So I think that's okay. You don't have to spoon feed an audience, do you? I think you can leave some things opaque.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the first time you watch The Matrix, you're not going to get that. Well, like when the Oracle is handing a cookie to Neo, it's a programming joke. You'll get that like the 10th time you watch it.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Our film's full of cookies. Actually, you just haven't realised it yet.
Yeah, that's funny.
Which probably maybe nudge towards a conclusion. But I wanted to ask, because I know you're going to be doing more screenings, is there a good place for people to sort of look for the upcoming list of screenings and locations and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, if you go to our website, which is www.closeandremote.net, there is a list of the upcoming screenings on the page, which is called We Are Making a Film About Mark Fisher. And of course, people can watch it on Vimeo, pay per view, between the 8th and the 24th of December. So the idea of releasing it on Vimeo was especially to share the film with international audiences. So we've had quite a lot of international kind of traffic on the Instagram. So that's one of the reasons we're sharing it on Vimeo. But it will be touring around England, and then it's going up to Scotland early next year. And basically, if you're listening to this podcast and you would like to screen the film and have one of us come along for a bit of Q&A discussion, we're totally open to that.
Excellent. I will put the website in the description for this. And Yeah, it sounds good.
Cool.
Um, I'm sure it will now sort of supplant Die Hard as everyone's favorite Christmas film.
Yeah, totally. That's what we're heading for. That is our aim.
I thought that It's a Mad, 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 Mad World was the most
No, no, it's Die
watched. Is
Hard.
it? Okay.
Nobody
Oh,
watches that anymore.
what I'm telling people is there's a film I really liked that came out last year. I can't remember the exact title, but something the title is something like what Dr. Franz Fanon did while he was head of the Blida psychiatric unit in Algeria from 1953 to 1956. But there's a scene in that where there's a Christmas party. So I've decided it's like a Christmas film.
Nice.
Uh-huh. Right, yeah. It's just got to have a bit of holly in it, and there you go. It's a Christmas
Yeah,
film.
excellent.
Great.
Well, thank you very much for coming along. And
Thank
yeah,
you.
Thank you.